Hello students, so today we will be seeing a full revision of your EVS class. EVS, as you know, is Environmental Science and Engineering. Totally you have 5 units. What are they? Unit 1 is Environment, Ecosystem and Biodiversity. Now I am telling you a very easy method to keep all 5 units in your mind very easily. Okay. So first unit is Environment, Ecosystem and Biodiversity. Unit 2 is Environmental Pollution. Unit 3 is Natural Resources and the Environment. Unit 4 is Social Issues and the Environment. Unit 5 is Human Population and the Environment. Okay. Fine. Now we are in Unit 1, Environment, Ecosystem, Biodiversity. Environment, Ecosystem, Biodiversity. So it is a 3-component system, 1, 2 and 3 parts. Okay. Now we will see the first part. It is 3-component system. Number 1, environment. Number 2, ecosystem. Number 3, biodiversity. There are separate points for each part of the first unit. So the first unit has 3 parts: environment, ecosystem and biodiversity. Environment is anything that surrounds any given organism. So this is you. Anything that surrounds you is called as the environment. You are surrounded by biotic and the abiotic components. Okay, now we will go into the details very quickly. Okay, first component, environment. Environment is anything that surrounds a given living organism. There are 2 components, biotic and abiotic components. Okay, BAB. Biotic components are producer, consumer and decomposer, and they transfer energy, and each level of transfer between the producer, the consumer and the decomposer is called as the trophic level. Okay, so I am writing everything in short form so that you can remember it easily as a mind mapping technique. So biotic, producer, consumer, decomposer, they transfer energy. Each step is called as a trophic level. And within consumers there are primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. Within decomposers, primary, secondary and tertiary decomposers are there. Abiotic components are non-living systems. 3 physical components which can easily be remembered. They are the hydrosphere, the atmosphere and the lithosphere. All the aquatic components are there in the hydrosphere. All the gases which are there in the earth system, which are the mixture of gases, that is in the atmosphere, and all the rocks, the soil, the earth, everything together forms the lithosphere. You can remember it easily by the word HAL. Okay, so biotic systems, producer, consumer, decomposer. Abiotic systems, hydrosphere, atmosphere, lithosphere. How are they linked? The systematic interaction, they are systematically linked. The systematic interaction between the biotic and the abiotic components in an environment is what you call as the second part of the first unit. You call it as an ecosystem. Okay, so systematic interaction between biotic and abiotic, you call it as a ecosystem. Now ecosystem, I already told you, it is the systematic interaction between the biotic and the abiotic. Remembering it once again, biotic is producer, consumer, decomposer. Abiotic is hydrosphere, atmosphere, lithosphere. This is how you have to remember in your mind. And ecosystem has both structure and function. Okay, structure and function. What is the structure of the ecosystem? The structure of the ecosystem is fundamentally, for your syllabus, you will learn about 2 different structures of the ecosystem. One is the land ecosystem and the other is the aquatic ecosystem. The land ecosystem, basically it can be divided into three depending on where they are in the earth. Okay, this is the equator, and the regions near to the equator are called tropical regions. The regions slightly away with moderate climates are called as temperate regions, and the regions at the extreme levels are called as polar regions. Now based on this classification, we call them as tropical, temperate and polar, TTP. Okay, remember it as TTP, tropical, temperate, polar. And all these three types are found in the three basic types of land ecosystem. What are they? Forest, grassland and desert ecosystem. Forest, grassland, desert ecosystem. Okay, so this is the structure of the land ecosystem. When you come to the aquatic ecosystem, what you should remember is the aquatic ecosystem is fundamentally divided into whether the water body is standing or flowing, whether it is stagnant. If it is stagnant, it is staying in one place, then you call it as lentic. Okay, if it is flowing, then you call it as lotic. Some of the lentic ecosystems are ponds and lakes. Some of the lotic ecosystems are rivers and streams. So remember it like that. This is the physical structure of the ecosystem. Now here, what are the determining factors that govern life? In case of the land ecosystem, the major factors are rain, sun, temperature and soil conditions. Okay, these are the major factors which govern the kind of diversity of life that is found and the kind of relationship between the biotic and abiotic factors that are present in this particular ecosystem. Whereas in the case of aquatic ecosystem, what are they? If this is an aquatic system, as you go deeper, the temperature will come down, the amount of light will also come down, and with increasing depth there is the increasing problem of pressure. Also the nutrients are much more important in the aquatic ecosystem, because here depending on the nutrients, if there is only one kind of nutrient, very strict nutrient level, then you call it as oligotrophic. If there are too many nutrients, which is also not good, then you call it as eutrophic. So oligotrophic and eutrophic, these are common things. Okay, so that is the structure of the land ecosystem and the aquatic ecosystem. Now we are going to the function of the ecosystem. How does the ecosystem function? Coming to the function of the ecosystem can be understood as the linear progression of energy from the producer to the consumer, and finally the producer and consumer going to the decomposer. Okay. Now, how does this chain produce? How does the energy get transferred? It gets transferred in a very simple manner. If it is a unilinear transfer, then it is called as food chain. If it is a network of several food chains, which is actually what is happening in nature, then it is called as food web. Okay, so you have food chain and food web, the primary methods by which the energy is being transferred or how the ecosystem functions. Now, if you go deeper, the ecosystem functions by the help of what is called as biogeochemical cycles. Okay, so biogeochemical cycles. For your environmental science and engineering course, you are required to remember or learn about two fundamental biogeochemical cycles. They are the nitrogen cycle and the oxygen cycle. The oxygen cycle is pretty basic, but in the nitrogen cycle, you should remember terms like nitrification, denitrification, ammonification, etc. You can watch the detailed lecture videos available in my channel for that particular purpose. This is a revision class. Okay. So nitrogen cycle is very important, and then oxygen cycle, and there are around 6 biogeochemical cycles which include the carbon cycle, the phosphorus cycle, the sulfur cycle, etc. But you are at present required to know these 2 cycles alone. Okay. Now this is the way in which the nutrients are balanced and systematically rotated within the biotic and the abiotic components, and the balance is maintained in the ecosystem. So I have just revised about the environment and the ecosystem. Now we are going to move on to the third part of the unit, which is the biodiversity, whose points are completely different from these 2 parts. Okay, the third part is biodiversity. The first part was environment, the second part was ecosystem, and the third part for the first unit, environment, ecosystem and biodiversity. So that is the third part, biodiversity. Okay, so unit 1, the third part. The first thing about biodiversity is the definition of biodiversity. It is the variety and variability. Okay, variability of what? Of living organisms. Okay, now that is number 1. So living organisms differ in, this is the second part, they differ in 3 types. Number 1, genetic diversity. This is diversity between the genes found between the different organisms. Species diversity. And number 3, ecosystem diversity. Okay, so that is 2. So these are the types. The first one is definition, the second one is types. So once you have learned the types of biodiversity, the third part is to identify the values given to each and every variety and variability between the organisms found in nature. We place certain values on organisms based on how they relate to us or how they relate to nature. So some of the examples, most important examples are productive value, consumptive value, medicinal values. These 3 are very important. Okay, from which you get products, from which you are able to consume, and from the diversity from which you get the medicines. Then you also have other values like aesthetic, spiritual, cultural, etc. You have a lot of values, but these 3 are the major values. Once you have dealt with the values, then you need to identify the threats to the biodiversity present. So what are the threats? Now very easily you can say that pollution is a threat and destruction of forests is a threat, but you should be very careful on how to mention them sequentially when you are answering a question. So there are 3 major threats. Loss of habitat. Okay. Number 2, poaching, which is the illegal trading of wildlife and wildlife related products. Number 3 is man-wildlife conflict. So loss of habitat, poaching and man-wildlife conflict. These are the 3 major threats. Once you have identified the threats, then the 5th point is you need to know how to conserve them. There are 2 methods of conservation of biodiversity. If you conserve the species within its own habitat, then it is called as in situ. If you conserve it outside its habitat, then it is called ex situ. So, in ex situ, this is how you should remember. In situ conservation is the conservation within the habitat. Ex situ conservation is the conservation outside the habitat. Now these are the major things under biodiversity. Now there is one more thing that you should understand within biodiversity. You should know that there are, within species, there are endangered, threatened, and extinct. But what is most important is the word endemic. It means that particular animal or that particular plant is found only in that particular place. It cannot be found anywhere else. Then it is called as an endemic species. So that is the very, very important word. And there are certain regions in the earth which are high in concentration of endemic species. So those areas which are high in concentration, which have a high concentration of endemic species are called as hotspots. Now there are around 26 to 28 hotspots all around the world, and in India you have two major hotspots, the Western Ghats and the Eastern Himalayas. Okay, so that was a very, very quick revision of Unit 1 and the major points that you should keep in your mind. Fine. So Unit 1 is composed of 3 parts. Number 1, environment, where you define the environment. You say about the producer, consumer, decomposer. You say about the biotic and abiotic parts. Number 2 is ecosystem, where you describe both the structure and the function of the ecosystem. You have two major ecosystems, the land and the aquatic. You can also call the land as the terrestrial ecosystem. And the third part of the first unit is biodiversity, which consists of the definition of biodiversity, the types of biodiversity, the values of biodiversity, the threats to biodiversity, and the methods of conservation of biodiversity, and finally you conclude with how you conserve the various forms of biodiversity. Now for a detailed explanation of all these things, you can watch my lectures on Unit 1 in the same channel. Okay. Right, so we have just seen the revision of Unit 1, which is environment, ecosystem and biodiversity. So this is out of the way. The second unit, Unit 2, is environmental pollution. Environmental pollution. So you know what the environment is, and now we are going to learn about environmental pollution. So environmental pollution unit is a very vast unit, but remember that it can be approached in a very, very easy format. So this particular method, if you follow, you will be able to construct an answer for any type of environmental pollution. So what are they? Please follow the 6-step method. That is, number 1, you define the pollution. Number 2, you talk about the sources of pollution. Number 3, you tell about the types of pollutions. Number 4, you explain the effects of the environmental pollution. Number 5, you talk about the prevention of the environmental pollution. And number 6, you talk about the controlled measures of the environmental pollution. Now I will be giving you just the basic methods of revision here. For a detailed look into the unit, you are always welcome to watch the detailed video lecture on Unit 2 in environmental pollution. Okay. Now, definition is the same for every kind of environmental pollution regardless of what it is. Any environmental pollution is defined as an undesirable change caused in the environment by physical, chemical or biological agents is called as environment. So UDCEPCB, remember this series of words. Any undesirable change in the environment caused by physical, chemical or biological agents is called as environmental pollution. Sources, there are always two sources. One is the point source, the other is the non-point source. Point sources, you can pinpoint that this is the source of pollution. Non-point source is generally an entire area where pollution is spread and you cannot localize that the pollution is because of this particular agent or this particular spot. Types of air pollutants. There are various types of air pollutants depending on the kind of pollution, whether it is air pollution, whether it is water pollution. For example, if it is air pollution, then I have told you that there are some major air pollutants which you can watch in the video lecture on air pollution in this particular channel. For example, there is carbon monoxide, there is nitrous oxide, there are sulfur oxides. But in the case of water pollution, there are the types of pollutants are basically organic or inorganic. Okay. So that is the type. They are very specific to the kinds of pollution. The effect of pollution. When you talk about the effects of pollution, there are three things that you should remember. You should always tell about the effects on animals. Here you can tell about the effects on humans. For example, air pollution causes respiratory problems in human beings. So those kinds of problems you can mention in what? In the effects of pollution on animals. The effect of pollution on plants. How does the particular type of pollution affect plant life? And effect of pollution on the environment itself. What are the effects on the environment? For example, some kinds of pollutions may contribute to global warming. Some kinds of pollution may cause what is called as photochemical smog. So those kinds of mentions you have to mention. So 1, 2 and 3. 3 major effects you are supposed to mention in every single effect of environmental pollution. Preventive measures. This is where you can let your heart out. Okay. But what is majorly expected is you should be mentioning about the preventive steps taken for each and every kind of pollution. For example, you can wear a mask and prevent the air pollution from entering your system. That is a preventive step. But then what is the difference between preventive and control measures? In the case of preventive steps, you can plant more trees to avoid air pollution, you can wear a mask, or you can place a building away from a particular source of air pollution. But when it comes to control, you cannot exactly prevent the air pollution from happening. You are there inside the polluted environment, but you are able to control the kind of pollution that is coming. So that is called as control measures. For example, in the case of air pollution, you can control the air pollution to a significant amount by using air pollution control devices like electrostatic precipitator, cyclone separators, bag filters. For a detailed list, you can always watch my detailed video lectures in this particular channel on air pollution. And for water pollution, you have water treatment and wastewater treatment, where you can reduce the organic and the inorganic load in the water and make it purer, or reduce the amount of chemical oxygen demand or the biochemical oxygen demand. So that is the difference between prevention and control. So always remember, whenever you are explaining about the types of pollution, you should always explain any single type of environmental pollution with this 6-step method. Now in this unit, what are the major environmental pollutions that you are seeing? You will be seeing about air pollution, you will be seeing about water pollution, you will be seeing about soil pollution, and within water pollution and air pollution, you will be seeing a kind of pollution called thermal pollution, which is because of heat. And in water pollution, you will be seeing an additional pollution called marine pollution, which is the kind of pollution that happens in the oceans. And then you have what is called as nuclear hazards. Okay, what is a potential nuclear hazard? You should learn. Then one of the most important types of pollutions that you learn is about solid waste management. Now solid waste cannot be prevented, it cannot be controlled, it can only be managed. That is why you call it as municipal solid waste management. Okay, so when it comes to municipal solid waste management, there are a couple of things that you should remember. Number one is the flow chart, the 6-step method to remembering how the solid waste is generated. So how is the solid waste generated, or what are the things that you do? So when it comes to solid waste is either biodegradable or non-biodegradable. Whatever be the case, the solid waste must first be generated. Once it is generated, you collect it, you segregate it, you transport it to a safe location, and then you dispose it. And disposal, there are 3 major methods. One is the landfill, where you simply dump it inside a landfill. The other is incineration, where you can burn the solid waste, reducing its volume. And the third is you can turn it into a useful compost. Okay, so it is something like LIC policy. Okay, this is an easy method to remember. So landfill, incineration and composting. Okay, so these are the steps involved for taking care of solid waste. There is one more thing that you should remember in solid waste management, which is the 3R method. What is the 3R method? Reduce, recycle and reuse. This is the 3-step method for the solid waste management. So that concludes the revision for the second unit. Okay, it may seem very short, but for a more detailed look, you can always look into my detailed video lecture on environmental pollution. Okay. Right, now we are going to move into the third unit, which is natural resources and the environment. So far we have revised unit 1, which is environment, ecosystem, biodiversity, that is out of our way. Unit 2, environmental pollution, that is also out of our way. Now we are going to unit 3, which is natural resources and environment. Now I will give you the basic structure of this unit. For a detailed lecture, you are always welcome to look into my detailed lecture in this particular YouTube channel. Okay. Now, to remember the natural resources, there are 6 natural resources. Okay. You will have to remember 6 natural resources. You can easily remember them with the sentence, finally finished with my environmental lesson. Now remember the first letter of every word here, finally finished with my environmental lesson, which corresponds to the first letter of the natural resource. So forest, food, water, mineral, energy and land. Okay, so these are the 6 natural resources that you should remember when you are learning about this particular unit. And within that, there are certain things that you should remember. There are specific keywords associated with each particular resource. For example, with forest, you have deforestation. For food, you have 2 things, mal and undernutrition. For water, there are a whole lot of things, but you should mainly remember about the water resources in reference to dams. Mineral resources, always remember the effects on the environment caused due to mining. It can be surface mining or subsurface mining. Fine. Energy, always remember that there are 2 energy sources, renewable energy sources and non-renewable energy sources. In the case of land resources, always remember this word, overgrazing and desertification. Okay, so these are the specific keywords associated with each particular kind of resource. They are unique to that particular natural resources. Okay, now I told you the basic 6 types of natural resource that you should remember. Now, regardless of the type of natural resource, there is a specific structure to every natural resource. Any natural resource, you should remember what is the use of that particular natural resource to you and to the environment. Okay, so that is the first one. What is the use of that particular natural resource? Number 2, you should talk about the ways in which this particular natural resource is exploited. So exploitation. Okay. Actually, when it is exploited more than a certain limit, then it is called over exploitation. And this over exploitation, there is a very simple method. There is a very simple methodology or a sequence of events that happens here. They are 3 Ds. Okay, I call them the 3Ds, and they are, you arrange them as a triangle, put 3D in the middle. This is just for a reference, you can remember. If you want, you can write it as an answer also. Number one, whenever they start any activity to remove the natural resource, it has to start with deforestation, which is the cutting away of large areas of forest. Deforestation invariably leads to the degradation of the soil quality, the land quality. So, degradation. Degradation will eventually lead to the complete destruction of the land and will turn it into a desert. So, desertification. So always remember this 3D method to the approach on any particular issue on the natural resources. Starts with deforestation, degradation, desertification. So these are the 3Ds. Use, exploitation. Number 3 is conservation. What do you do to conserve the natural resource? Okay, how will you conserve each of the 6 natural resources? So that is very, very important. Conservation of natural resources, you need to write how you can conserve each and every kind of the 6 natural resources that we have, and you can mention the most important part of this is how can you as an individual conserve the natural resources. So role of individual in the conservation of natural resources. This is very, very clear and straightforward answer. For example, if you are asked about the role of an individual in the conservation of water resources, then you may say that you must be closing the taps on time, you should not allow the leaking of taps, you should maintain the taps properly, and you need not take showers, you could use a bucket of water instead. So for each and every resource you should have at least 2 or 3 points which you should mention for the role of an individual in the conservation of natural resources. Apart from this, you should also know about the impacts of agriculture in traditional and modern methods. Okay, what was the impact of agriculture in the environment due to traditional methods and due to modern methods. This will be overlapping in Unit 3 and in Unit 4. And you will also need to mention about the various natural ways of conservation of resources, for example rainwater harvesting, watershed management, and also you will have to mention about bioremediation and other technologies which are available to conserve or restore the environment back to its pristine natural state. So that concludes our revision of the 3rd unit, which is natural resources and the environment. I will repeat it again to you. There are 6 natural resources. Finally finished with my environmental lesson. The first letter of each word corresponds to a natural resource: forest, food, water, energy, land, and in between you will have mineral resources. So those are the resources, and for any resource, number 1 is the use of that particular resource to you and to the environment. Number 2 is how that particular resource is being overexploited at the cost of the environment. And number 3 is how you will conserve that particular natural resource. And fundamental in understanding of all these things is deforestation, degradation, desertification. And in land resource there is one more word called overgrazing, which is nothing but the effect of too many animals grazing on one particular part of land. Livestock, a large amount of livestock grazing on the land, and an increased trampling by their hoofs will cause what is called a soil compaction. Okay, and throughout this unit you will have to mention about the effects on soil, and fundamentally the effects on soil is the loss of soil fertility. That is the fundamental effect. So those are the major things. Of course, for a complete and detailed look into the 3rd unit, you are very much welcome to watch my detailed video lectures on natural resources and the environment, just as they are available for every single unit of this subject. Fine. Now we are going to revise Unit 4, Social Issues and the Environment. What have we seen so far? We have seen Unit 1, Environment, Ecosystem, Biodiversity, that is over. Unit 2, Environmental Pollution, that is over. Unit 3, Natural Resources and the Environment, that is also over. Now Unit 4 is a very small unit, but some terms are very important. I have listed the majorly important terms here. Number 1 is you must know what is sustainability. Sustainability is the ability of the present generation to meet its own needs without compromising the needs of the future generation. That you should remember. And once you remember sustainability, you should also remember what is sustainable development. There are 3 aspects to sustainable development. There is social sustainability, economic sustainability and environmental sustainability. So the 3 sustainabilities you should mention as a triangle, and there are 3 aspects they are also called the 3 pillars of sustainable development. When you talk about sustainability, you should also be aware of the sustainable methods. Some of these methods you have come across in Unit 3 where you will conserve the natural resources. For example, conservation of natural resources such as water resources involves sustainable methods such as rainwater harvesting or watershed management. Those are 2 examples of very good sustainable methods which lead to the sustainable development of water resources. Then you have what is called as urbanization. Urbanization is the practice of people moving from the rural areas to the urban areas in search of job opportunities or a better livelihood because the conditions are not so favorable in the rural areas. And within the urban area, if there is a rapid spread, then you call it as an urban sprawl. Then you have certain terms such as consumerism. Consumerism means overexploitation of resources for consumptive purposes. For example, if a man requires only 1 bottle of water, he ends up buying 6 bottles of water and uses only 2 bottles of water. The remaining bottles of water are simply wasted. And that aspect which makes a human being consume more than what he requires, and every time something is consumed it places a huge burden on the natural resource, that is called as consumerism. And please bear in mind that there are many modern concepts which are not exactly coming in the syllabus, but things that you should be aware of such as carbon footprinting, ecological footprinting and life cycle assessment. These are things that you should be majorly aware of. Then you have the environmental impact assessment. For any engineering project, we have an environmental impact assessment which is done before the project, during the project and after the project. Okay, so that is out of the way. And finally, the most important aspect of the 4th unit is the environmental law and legislation. Now I have a very simple way for you to remember this. You just remember it in 3 formats. Number 1, Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, mainly air pollution, water pollution. Number 2, Protection Act of Wildlife. And number 3, Conservation. So the Forest Conservation Act comes under this. So divide the environmental laws and legislation like this. It will be easier for you to learn about the different aspects. And of course, for the entire revision, you are always welcome to look into my video lectures in this particular channel. Now we are into the revision of the last unit of EVS, which is Human Population and Environment. Unit 1 we have seen is Environment, Ecosystem, Biodiversity. Unit 2, Environmental Pollution. Unit 3, Natural Resources. Unit 4, Social Issues. And now Unit 5, Human Population. The most important aspects of human population is the demographic part, or the study of the human population, which is natality and mortality. Natality corresponds to the birth rate and mortality corresponds to the death rate per 100 people. So remember that. Okay. Then you need to remember what is called as the age structure. The easiest way to remember is pre, re and post productive. These are the 3 age groups. Pre-productive age groups is 0 to 14. This is from 15 to 45. And this is around 46 to 75. Post-productive. Based on this age structure, if you define it as a graphical representation, you will end up with what is called as a population pyramid, which gives you an instant look into the status of the population and where it is going to go after a period of 10 or 15 years. You have three different population pyramids. Basically, this is the population pyramid. You have the male, you have the female, you have the divisions from 0 to 5 to 10 in 5-year intervals till the average life expectancy, and you have the numbers in millions here. So if we take it into a graph, then there are three possible shapes. One shape is the pyramid shape where the base is strong, which means there are a lot of children, and after 10 or 15 years this population is going to increase. This is indicative of a rising population, and this is what is called as the first kind of population pyramid, the pyramid shaped population pyramid. The second type is the bell shaped pyramid, which is an almost a stable kind of population, which is because it has a very rich population at the bottom, lot of children and lot of youth, which means the population is going to increase, but it is quite stable. The amount of youth will be replaced by the large amount of children. So this is the bell shaped population. And the last shape of population is the urn shape, which is a very dangerous shape. It has very few children who need to replace a large amount of young people, workforce, and that is indicative of a declining population. This is indicative of a rising population, and this is indicative of a stable population. Apart from the demographics, the population pyramid, the age structure, natality, mortality, and all those information on population, you will directly go into some of the aspects where population is a major issue. For example, one of the major epidemics to strike the modern 21st century is HIV and AIDS. Human immunovirus acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. This is the disease, this is the causative agent. So be very clear about that. Be very clear about where it is coming from. Be very clear about the three major modes of transmission. Remember that there are three modes of transmission for HIV virus to infect a person, healthy individual. One is unprotected sex, sexual intercourse with an infected person. Number two is through blood transfusions, and number three is through the transplacental transmission from an infected mother to the unborn child. Okay, so those are the three major issues, and there is no available vaccination for this. There is some kind of treatment, but you classify them under anti, or you call them as retroviral drugs. Okay, you can also call them as anti-retroviral drugs. So that is a cocktail of medicines which are available to prolong the lifespan of a HIV infected person who has developed AIDS. AIDS is a destruction of the autoimmune system in our body. Another important aspect is the women and child welfare programs that are present in our country and also abroad. So basically, if you want to remember them very easily, just remember that there are only two aspects to this. One is education and the other is health. So these are the two major issues which are very prominent for both women and child welfare. And when it comes to welfare, it is also important in the case of family, because family welfare and family planning programs are very important in deciding the population and the kind of population that a country has. Okay, the socio-economic status of a population, the demographic status of a population, all of those things are very much dependent on the family welfare programs and the family planning programs that a particular government has. The last but the most important, one of the most important aspects of the fifth unit is the role of information technology in managing the population and maintaining a record of the different aspects. So in this you have databases like NVIS, which maintains information about the environment. You have what is called as remote sensing, okay, where you can sense the status of agriculture, how agriculture is going on from a very remote location such as a satellite. And you have GPS, global positioning system, where you can determine the exact longitude and latitude of different environmental samples or an environmental location or an area of interest where a site of environmental pollution has taken place. So all of these things are very important in maintaining a healthy population and understanding the impact of that particular population on the environment. So that was the 5th unit. As always, you are very much welcome to watch my full video lectures, and this was a compendium of all the 5 units of Environmental Science and Engineering course. It was a very quick revision and you should use it.